The title of my talk is Decarbonizing Real Estate. And when I say real estate, I mean typically large-scale building owners. And I'm going to talk on a very high level, sort of the academic view of the problem at hand to give you a conceptual understanding of what we're talking about. And to briefly introduce myself, I'm from the US and I have a renewable energy background. So I was building solar and battery power plants for a while, and now I'm in the building industry and I lead a Bundesamt für Energie funded project on this topic. So the mission is definitely how to decarbonize buildings in the next 30 years. And what's really cool about large scale investors in real estate is that they own so much. So there's really a concentration of power in the decision making. So it's not just for one building, it's for a whole portfolio of buildings. So to get towards a sustainable building stock, I think it's really important to consider all of the social objectives. And these, of course, are CO2, which is the focus of things like the renovation wave, but also affordability and community and densification, other zoning related aspects. So this holistic approach with regards to policy objectives, of course, different audiences focus on different things. So as you heard from Tina, there's a lot of focus on climate, but also what's really not talked about and highly relevant in this sector is affordability, which is popping up in cities all around the world right now. Sometimes it's called gentrification, other times it's just rent increases due to other macroeconomic factors. But we've seen this in Geneva, Basel, Paris, Berlin, New York, Tokyo, you name the major city. There are rent control or some affordability initiatives that have come in within the last 5 years. And I will argue today that this is a really important thing to consider when solving the problem of green renovations. So the main research question on a high level is how can policy accelerate this diffusion of sustainable retrofit? So differentiating from green, but really including all of those aspects. And remember, like I'm an energy engineer and climate scientist by training, but the problem is beyond energy. So it's one of my personal learnings from this project is that it's vital to consider all of these sustainability aspects. Otherwise, there's inherent conflicts. So in the rapidly changing policy mix, as Tina presented, the different policies target different owners in various ways. So a private homeowner makes retrofitting decisions in very different ways than a large-scale investor. So, but in the end, the technology is the same. So we're talking about improving the facade of the building, windows, heating systems, putting on solar PV or other renewable energy, and of course, things that you look for as a person, kitchen and bathrooms. Large-scale investors are really important. It's very hard to figure out exactly how much they own, but approximately 20% of the Swiss building value is owned by large-scale investors. And they have the majority of investments in buildings every year. And as part of my project, I interviewed in depth 4 large-scale investors to get a corporate perspective on how they set their strategies and decision-making with regards to retrofits and sustainability. And I like to call them the big fish. And there's also policymakers and various industry players. So when we unpack this black box, what we figured out is that integrating sustainability presents a fundamental transformation to how real estate works at the systemic and firm level. So if large-scale investors are in the middle, they have traditionally their economic aspects. All these different policies coming from rent controls or energy, climate, zoning are pushing them really in different directions about what to do, when to retrofit, and also when to retrofit the building. And at the same time, they're pressured by market forces, of course, from climate activism that has driven investors into sustainable and impact investing, along with tenants to integrate sustainability, which challenges them in their traditional decision-making processes focused on economic aspects, such as assets under management, as listed above, or return on investment. So upon interviewing many different large-scale investors and really getting into the teams over asset managers, portfolio managers, etc., we figured out there's two main tensions. So, and it's important to understand that this tension isn't at the company level. It's really depending on the portfolio, which they cluster different buildings into, which could be focused on residential buildings, or it could be focused on a geography, or it could be a green building fund. So the real estate market and the portfolio is fundamental for how sustainability can be integrated. And this conflict, which isn't rocket science, is that this, as I said before, the top-down economic prioritizations, they have to meet a certain goal by the end of the year, and the top-down strategies actually conflict when they have to make a plan for a retrofitting project, which is really context-specific. And going even deeper to the various roles in the team that I mentioned, is the decision to retrofit is fragmented across many different roles. And the complexity of integrating a whole new objective of sustainability challenges how they even work in the cycle of planning, budgeting, and valuating, as Andre will talk about later with the valuations. So there's two high-level recommendations here that we think are really important for investors and owners to take into account, is to think about how to plan over the long-term horizon, maybe to 2050 or longer than they do now, which is typically in 5 to 10 years, about how to decarbonize portfolios. And of course, these tools are very important for the market, and I might or might not be working on such a thing. The second thing is that actually the KPIs at the role level need to be benchmarked to some kind of CO2 aspect for every role in the company, not just ESG, because in the end, they need to have a stake in the game. Going to policy. So now we know how the firms react, but policy mixes really present a trade-off between affordability and sustainability over various instruments. And when I say instruments, there's those that directly target retrofits, such as building energy codes, CO2 taxes, incentives, and those indirectly, tenant laws and affordability. And what we found out is that actually all of the direct things which are focused on climate and energy are just boundary conditions. So they set the depth of the retrofit, so how carbon neutral the building will be, but they don't really impact speed very much. What's more influential for retrofitting speed is these real estate market aspects, because that's how the investors think. And in general, this presents a societal trade-off between the economy and the environment. And we really need to align this in order to have sustainable retrofit speed increase. The particular issue here is that right now, when large-scale investors do green retrofits, they typically target very high-value buildings, like in the center of a city, and to raise rents very high. And then they would target a label, such as Minergie. And this has been shown in other cities to create social instability, coined as a new term, green gentrification. And of course, that's not a huge problem yet in Switzerland, but if we imagine how many renovations need to happen, this is a really important aspect to consider. So, integrated policy mixes. As the regulators face a trade-off, we need to actually have the departments working together. The tenant law people and the energy people and the climate people are not really working together to set these objectives. And I argue that we need a multi-pronged approach to break down these silos, or else this feedback loop of large-scale investors building high-value properties, and then that causing the issue of politics, and then creating rent controls, they understand this cycle. And we, as a society, need to find a way to get out of it. So we know the fundamental policy barriers. So I argue that we need an integrated policy mix and a chance to innovate how we think about policy. So on a high level, you can think about, we have this policy mix with an objective and different instruments inside of it. And then when you add different objectives, such as decarbonization or other things such as zoning laws or sustainable financial markets, we need to align how all of these incentives work for the large scale investors, because real estate market orientation is a decisive factor for sustainability integration. And it is often the broader policy mix rather than the individual instruments which are most relevant for retrofits. So the final kind of conclusion, and I know this might sound like some academic jargon, but we need to align the coherence between the objectives so they don't conflict, and at the same time make sure the instruments are aligned to incentivize. And here we advance that policymakers can move beyond just incentivizing components such as windows or heating system, but really think about how to regulate real estate markets such that there's sustainable retrofits. And you could think about subsidizing rents based on the achievement of a label and a controlled return for the investor, along with changing the way the CO2 tax is distributed. So these are just some ideas, but essentially we're just trying to present a way to solve both problems at once, because we notice that there's direct conflicts. And I know this is a very high level thing, so feel free to answer more detailed questions to me next. Thank you.